I've designed 3 different editions of these serving boards, and this most recent one I like the most. I designed the boards with 5 individual shapes, and in doing so ensured that each of these shapes could visually stand on its own, although the shape down the middle is my favorite. It was also important to me to see the pieces come to a fine point at each end. While looking simple, it's actually quite complex to produce. Everything about them has to be extraordinarily accurate, so a huge amount of time was spent in SketchUp, first designing the shapes and then figuring out how to make the cutting jigs for the bandsaw. Designing the jigs in SketchUp allowed me to figure out how the 3 jigs move on top of each other using 10 pivot points. In SketchUp you can actually pivot the parts, so you can pivot them through the saw blade and see exactly where the cut will be and locate all your pivot points perfectly. The bandsaw fixtures are then cut on a CNC router. I've enjoyed showing these to my fellow woodworkers, and no one believes that it was glued right off of a bandsaw cut. In order to create a smooth S-curve and glue right off the bandsaw cut, the key is a Lennox TriMaster carbide tip blade. The bottom board of the jig is attached to the bandsaw table. Pivot holes line up with the leading edge of the bandsaw blade. The middle board pivots on the first board. The top board pivots halfway on the middle board, then the cut is finished with the middle board pivoting on the bottom board. Next, I screw 2 different species of wood together very accurately. Between them, I use a self-adhesive carpet protective plastic sheet, which will keep the edges from gluing together in further processes. The top board pivots until it hits a stop, which is exactly the inflection point of the curve. Then the middle board pivots to finish the cut. I change the pivot points for each new cut. The second cut is similar to the first cut in that the top board pivots first until it hits a stop on the second board, and then the second board pivots on the first board. The middle boards are switched to create the alternating pattern. I glue together with Titebond 3. I use a heavy spread because it dries very quickly. I glue them together in a jig so the boards don't slip from side to side. It has rails on the side that hold the boards up just above the clamps that are underneath. Gluing in a jig is vital so everything stays perfectly aligned. I use strong backs to make sure that everything stays flush. And then they're clamped together very tightly. They can be removed from the gluing jig as soon as the clamps are tight so that you can just continue the process and glue continuously till everything's glued up. The third cut is just a simple arc. I number all the pivot points so I know which order to do the various cuts. The fourth cut is just a simple arc. I pay great attention to keep the parts in exact order so they'll glue back together properly. The boards were flipped again to make the pattern and then glued together in the same jig. Then the outside cuts were made. Here are some photos of making the end cuts with a simple pivoting jig. I cut the grooves on the end of the boards on a shaper with a sliding table fixture. The boards were finished with Watco Butcher Block oil. There are a lot of interesting techniques in this project, and I would hope that people watching could take some of them and apply them to their own projects. I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone might have.